Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. Once again, it's time to get official with our Banzuke predictions, now for July 2025. This one's coming out a bit earlier than usual because I'll soon be on my way to Iowa to judge like 100 Muay Thai fights over 4 days. So before I have fun with that, let's faceplant into some sumo. If you saw the instant Banzuke, there are a few changes here, so keep watching. The math's already done, so let's start at the top. Hoshoryu, the Yokozuna who was already a Yokozuna, stays at Yokozuna 1 East. Onosato, the Ozeki who is now a Yokozuna, goes to Yokozuna 1 West. He will have a chance to bypass Hoshoryu by getting more wins than him next time. Will it happen? We'll see. A lot of Hoshoryu fans were really mad at me for suggesting he's not going to do as well as Onosato over the course of his career. Well, I guess we'll find out, right? Kotozakura, the only Ozeki left, he will shift over to Ozeki 1 East, pretty easy. And now, will Kirishima get pushed ahead of Daisho because he had one more win in the last Basho? Hard to say. For quite a while, the committee didn't push a top Sekiwake back, so the Sekiwake 1 East, unless the one on the west side had far more wins, like 4 more wins, 5 more wins. The most recent example of this, though, was when Kotozakura, as Koto Nowaka, was 11-4 at Sekiwake 2 East, and Daisho was 9-6 at Sekiwake 1 East. As you can see from the rank next Basho thing, Koto Nowaka was pushed ahead to Sekiwake 1 East, and Daisho was pushed back to Sekiwake 1 West. However, that was a 2-win difference, and even though it doesn't seem like much, the committee could see a 2-win difference as being meaningful as opposed to just 1. Or the fact Koto was coming up from Sekiwake 2 might have skewed how they looked at things, even though there's not really a good reason why it would. They don't really have a current general tendency for us to lean on, so there's really no way to know how they're going to go with this. What we can be pretty sure of is that Wakatake Kage is going to end up at Sekiwake 2 West, because that balances out the Banzuke, 3 and 3, and he goes at the end of the Sekiwake line because, like with the Yokozuna, he is new to the rank, he is being freshly promoted to the rank, so he goes at the back. Komusubi. There's no option for Komusubi East except Oshoma. Now, for the other one, I've seen a number of comments or questions about whether Aonishiki will actually get spiked all the way from Maegashira 9 to Komusubi West, and in a vacuum, that's a completely reasonable question. But if we accept that only people with a winning record can be promoted, and those people in this case are Maegashira 9 East, 8 East, and 8 West, they're not going to look at people at Maegashira 8 any differently than Maegashira 9. So Aonishiki is the only really logical choice for Komusubi West. It's an unusual jump, but any other choice would be even stranger. Now for a pick where logic may well get thrown out the window, Takayasu. And there is actually a clear logic at work here. Because the Sanyaku got bigger, relative placement changed. For example, before, when there were 7 Sanyaku, Maegashira 1 East would be number 8. Now, because there's 8 Sanyaku, Maegashira 1 East is going to be number 9. So the Sanyaku expanded, which means all of the Maegashira ranks, in a relative sense, are a half rank lower than they were before. So if we put Takayasu at Maegashira 1 East, that means where last Basho, and I'm sorry if this is confusing, if you think about it, it does make sense, but it sounds weird if you've never thought of it like this before. If Takayasu last time was number 6, which would be where Komusubi 1 East is relatively speaking, with 7 people in the Sanyaku, now he's dropping to number 9, because there's 8 guys up here, and then this becomes number 9. 3 slots is generally equivalent to a rank and a half. Going down a rank and a half on 6 and 9 is pretty normal. They're not going to have much reason to think that that is too small of a demotion. Plus, if we look at Waka and Oho and Abi, if they all go down a half a rank, then they're all going down, again, relatively speaking, 2 slots. Maegashira 1 was number 8, and now 1 West is going to be number 10. Similarly, for Oho, 1 West was number 9, relatively speaking. Now it's 2 East is number 11. Abi, number 10 to number 12, right? 2 slots equals 1 rank. Again, generally speaking, when you have a 7 and 8 record, your expected demotion is 1 rank. Therefore, this should actually seem like a pretty normal demotion. The committee should be very happy with this. I think they're going to look at this and be like, oh, that looks perfect. The reason I say this is where logic will probably get thrown out the window is because this is a perfect situation for them to do something super goofy and completely blow our expectations. But I'm not really sure what that would be. If they're going to do anything different from this, they could do anything. So I'm going to stick with Takayasu at Maegashira 1 East. It makes the most sense by far. And going with anything else is trying to guess at the sort of arbitrary decisions they might make, which is just not worth the time. Onokatsu and Kinbozan, they land exactly where they're supposed to at Maegashira 3. Tamawashi and Hiradeumi. Now, Tamawashi and Hakuoho were tied. Hiradeumi was a half rank behind them. But again, consider the relative thing. There are recent decisions that suggest they take this into consideration. Just this past January, Ura was 7 and 8 at Maegashira 4 West. The Sanyaku was 8 deep. It went to 7 in March. That means everybody in Maegashira goes up a half rank, relatively speaking. So Ura, in this case, there were 8 Sanyaku, so at 4 West, he's number 16. If he had stayed at that rank, overall, he would have been number 15. So they bumped him back a half rank because that would be number 16 on the next Banzuke. This situation is the flip of this. Tamawashi and Hiradeumi going down a half rank means they're actually going down 3 slots. 3 slots is usually 1.5 ranks. That's more likely to seem acceptable to the committee, so it's more likely they're just going to get dropped in at Maegashira 4. What I really don't think is going to happen is, even though Hakuoho was tied with Tamawashi and slightly ahead of Hiradeumi, I don't think they're going to use him to split those two. More than likely, Tamawashi and Hiradeumi are going to stay together. So even if I'm wrong and Hakuoho goes ahead of them, I think it would go Hakuoho, Tamawashi, Hiradeumi. But because of the factors already mentioned, I think this is what we're going to see. Tamawashi 4 East, Hiradeumi 4 West, Hakuoho 5 East. Takerufuji and Meisei tied, but Takerufuji was in the joy. He probably goes to 5 West. There's not really a reason to do otherwise. Meisei still getting over promoted to 6 East. Tobizaru, he goes to 6 West. He gets no demotion. That should be fine. Endo and Kusano are not actually tied. Kusano's going to go a lot further down. So we drop Endo in at 7 East and we're all good here. Let's slide Kusano out of the way. And now we get to the first change from the instant Banzuke. Initially, I had Sadano Umi stay in front of Gonoyama and Ichi Yamamoto. Later, when I was working on this, I put him behind them because even with the full rank difference mathematically, I think it still fits their recent tendencies well enough. November saw something similar where Churinaumi and Oshoma mathed out to rank 11 and Tamawashi and Meisei both mathed out to rank 10, but as you can see, even though Tamawashi and Meisei both ended up exactly where they were supposed to go, Oshoma and Churinaumi wound up ahead of them. Now that one was a little more complicated, there was more going on than that, but it is a kind of a comparison that we can look at. But that relative placement idea may come into play again. Yes, we're talking about further down the Banzuke, but if we look back at this past January again, Atami Fuji was Maegashira 2 West, and he was 5 and 10. 5 and 10, 5 ranks down, that means Maegashira 7 West. And guys in the Joy really never got over demoted unless there was a really good reason for it to happen. But in this case, this was when the Sanyaku was going from 8 to 7, so everyone was moving up, relatively speaking, a half a rank. And they were willing to move him to 8 East from 2 West, which is minus 5.5 ranks, looks like an overdemotion, but it was 10 slots, which is 5 ranks normally. If they're willing to do that when he's getting moved all the way to the middle of the division, there's no reason to think they won't take that into account here. Now the question is, exactly how do they take it into account? If Sada no Umi goes up to Maegashira 7 West, that's +6, even saying he gets bumped down a half a rank, that's still 5.5 spots, and they've been tending to not take guys from the bottom ranks and move them up more than their full promotion unless they don't have a choice. So 7 West doesn't seem right. If he stays at 8 West, +5, okay, that's 9 slots, 4.5 ranks. That doesn't seem like enough. To put him at exactly 10 slots up, relatively speaking, he has to go to 8 East and switch with Ichi Yamamoto. Now this looks kinda goofy, right? Gonoyama and Ichi Yamamoto were tied, a full rank behind Sada no Umi, so why are they gonna use Sada no Umi to split those two? And yet this is what I'm gonna go with. I understand it's maybe low percentage chance relative to how these things are usually done, but I don't know if Sada no Umi going above both of them or below both of them is more likely. I think the odds that Gonoyama stays ahead in this situation are pretty good because he was in the Joy, he got his ass beat from Go. Ichi Yamamoto, he fought a lot of Sanyaku guys, but it wasn't till more like the end of the Basho, so maybe that counts a little bit against him. I actually have no idea. But I think the most likely general thing I can say is that Sada no Umi and Ichi Yamamoto will be at Maegashira 8 in some order. One of them will be ahead of the other and Gonoyama will be ahead of both. If that's correct, I think that as weird as it looks, Sada no Umi at 8 East actually makes sense. That's what I'm gonna go with. If I'm wrong on this, I mean, that's probably 40 spots down in Guess the Banzuke where I finish, but hey, no guts, no glory, right? Ura slides into Maegashira 9 East pretty easily. Atami Fuji gets a nice bump to 9 West. We'll put Roga ahead of Takano Sho since they were both low ranked and Roga had a better record. And now we have Toki Hayate, Chiyoshoma, Midori Fuji, and Asakoryu. Now you might be wondering why I'm saying them as a group even though Toki is ahead. And on the Instant Banzuke, I had Toki Hayate stay in front of the other three, but now that I think about it more, I think it might be more complicated than that. I still think he's going to land somewhere at Maegashira 11, but I think it's plausible that Chiyoshoma gets ahead of him. Chiyoshoma wasn't really in the Joy, he only had one Sanyaku opponent, and even that was because Takayasu was doing terribly, and they might hold a grudge against him for the Henka on Hoshoryu. So, for a number of more subjective reasons, I am going to keep Toki at 11 East. It is the most likely landing spot. But on the Instant Banzuke, I had Chiyoshoma at 12 East and Midori at 11 West, and I've switched those two now. The fact that Chiyo, it seems plausible that he's going to finish ahead of Toki Hayate means it's more likely that he's going to finish at Maegashira 11 in either spot, so it makes more sense to predict that he's going to be at 11 West. And even though, for the most part, better records have been getting priority over higher ranks, I think that with the very large gap in ranks between Chiyo and Midori and Asakoryu, this seems like a situation where Asakoryu gets left behind. He ends up at the back of this list. It is quite plausible that they do Chiyo at 11 West, Asakoryu at 12 East, and then Midori at 12 West. That is absolutely possible. I think Midori and Asakoryu in this situation is basically a coin flip. On the Instant Banzuke, I had Asakoryu at the back of this group, and when I was planning for this video, I kept him at the back of this group. But as I'm recording, as I'm thinking about this in the moment, I'm calling an audible. Asakoryu, I am putting him ahead of Midori Fuji. They were tied, they were both low enough ranked that I think they will still give the priority to the guy with the better record in this case. I could well be wrong. I still think it's a coin flip. I mean, you could go either way and it's going to make perfect sense. And Chiyoshoma, I could be wrong, and Chiyoshoma could land at Maegashira 12 for sure. But if I think Chiyo is going to land at Maegashira 11, then if it's just Asakoryu and Midori Fuji that we're looking at against each other, I think Asakoryu ends up ahead. I may end up regretting that one, but hey, you gotta go with the vibes, right? Now we start to look at Juryo guys, Kusano and Wakai Ikari. I think the one safe thing you can count on is that Wakai Ikari is going to be at 14 West. He was behind Shodai, barely ahead of Chura no Umi, so Chura no Umi will most likely end up ahead of him at 14 East. Similarly, Shodai will probably end up ahead of Kusano. It may be that if they care about relative placement further up, once they get down here, they may stop caring, but the way things have been done, I just have a hard time seeing Kusano being at the front of this group. It's possible, but I think it's a relatively slim possibility. I had Kusano at 14 East on the instant Banzuke. Upon further reflection, I think 14 East and 13 West are about equivalent, but now I'm going to put him at 13 West. I feel like they're not going to be compelled to drop him as far as possible, which is essentially 14 East. He was 6 ranks ahead of Wakai Ikari. That may play into things a little bit, like they want to put some kind of a gap between those two. And the fact there's an outside chance at him landing at 13 East means putting him at rank 13 at all makes more sense. 14 East is absolutely plausible. If you think that's where he's going to land, it makes sense, go with it. But I'm switching him to 13 West. Kota Shoho and Kaio are both a half rank behind Hida no Umi. Kota Shoho will almost certainly go ahead, but Kaio was 7 and 8 at 16 East, so he will go no higher than 16 East. That means Hida no Umi slots in very nicely at 15 West. Now, with an extra Sanyaku, the last rank in the division is going to be 17 West, which means we need one guy to come back and fill things out. That will almost certainly be Shishi. Where does he go though? Well, on the instant Banzuke, I had him at 17 West because he was the one guy coming up, the one guy who didn't mathematically land in Makuuchi, so putting him at the end made sense. But in retrospect, Kotoeho mathematically was at 18 East. So when we do the math, we do it off of the Banzuke for the Basho that just finished. Well, 18 East doesn't exist anymore. 17 West is now the bottom rank. Now that shouldn't matter, right? Number 42 is number 42. But sometimes this stuff gets looked at in a goofy way, and the fact that he's getting bumped up on the numbers, like the numerical rank, just because there's no choice because of the structure of the Banzuke, I think it's more likely he ends up at the bottom, just staying at the bottom, 17 West, and Shishi goes ahead of him. Now, Shishi and Mitakayumi, that's much more of a coin flip. Shishi could end up ahead of Mitakayumi, but again, since Mitakayumi was a little further up mathematically and Shishi is being brought back, I think Mitakayumi is a little bit safer in the 16 West spot. I'm going to go more like 55-45 or 60-40, not a pure coin flip, but if you put Shishi ahead of Mitakayumi, again, that is a pretty logical choice. One other thing about Kotoeho though, at least one really good Guess the Banzuke player actually thinks he's not going to end up in Makuuchi. That person thinks Nishikigi is going to stay in the division. I'm guessing this is at least in part because of the whole Kotoeho mathed out to 18 East. 18 East doesn't exist, so to the committee, this person thinks that Kotoeho will be viewed as not actually earning the spot in the division. And that could happen. It is not an implausible scenario. In this case, I think it's still more likely that Kotoeho goes up just because Nishikigi is only going to drop one rank in that case, and that feels too small, especially when you've got this guy who by all rights has earned his spot in the top division. But if there's a question there, it adds that much more weight to the idea that Kotoeho will get stuck at the end of Makuuchi rather than get bumped ahead of Shishi and sticking him at the end. And that's our official Banzuke prediction for July 2025. Hope you had fun and wish me luck not getting lost in the cornfields of the American Midwest. I have some Guess the Banzuke reminder posts scheduled, but other than that, I'll see y'all when I get back. Have a splendid weekend.